see, the topic that I will be touching upon today is quite broad. So I will bring in psychology, I promise, but I will be talking about different aspects and actually bringing in some of the, I guess, most interesting angles of my research so far when it comes to cybersecurity and cybercrime. And as you can see, from the findings of my research, when we talk about cybersecurity and cybercrime, we expect people will start talking about technical difficulties and challenges. But yeah, surprise, the human factor keeps coming up, which is great for me because this is the area I'm looking at. Today we'll talk about the different, definitely the current cybercrime and threat landscape, but also the tools that criminals use, especially when targeting IoTs, for example, how they think, their attitudes, and how these attitudes shape behavior and lead attackers to online crime, but also finally, what can we do about enhancing resilience against different types of attacks? How can we prevent or respond to this kind of attacks? And let me start with a brief kind of discussion around the threat landscape. This year, the UK Cybersecurity Breaches Survey actually showed that 39% of businesses in the UK reported having a breach or a type of an attack within the last 12 months. And actually, of those 39%, the majority actually indicated that the main threat vector was phishing attempts. So phishing attacks continue to be quite prevalent. While 31% of businesses and 26% of charities estimate they were attacked at least once a week. So we see now that we don't have targets who are large organizations or corporations anymore. We see charities or SMEs becoming a target. So I will be discussing about that aspect along the way. Also, 1 in 5 of these companies identified a more sophisticated attack type, such as a ransomware, the DDoS attack, or malware, but they actually cited ransomware as a major threat, with 56% of businesses having a policy not to pay ransom. Now, when it comes in practice, although best practice actually indicates that you shouldn't be paying ransom, we see especially SMEs actually paying ransom because of the criticality of their business. They can't afford actually any disruption in their everyday functionalities. So we see actually, especially the SME sector paying ransom. And actually due to that threat landscape, we expect that by 2025, the global cybercrime damage will reach $10 trillion. Now, one of the main aspects that led to actually the prevalence of attacks and cyber attacks the last year or two, and especially during the pandemic, was the fact that many employees use personally owned devices to carry out work-related activities. And as you can see here, based on the same survey, 45% of businesses overall actually have employees and staff using their own devices for work, but also charities, and 64% of charities having employees using their own personal devices for work. And of course, as you can all understand, that can lead to serious risks and implications. And of course, I mentioned already phishing attacks as the main threat vector. And phishing attacks, as you're all aware of, can lead to ransomware attacks. And especially since the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen quite a high prevalence of ransomware attacks hitting sectors that were not really targets before, such as the healthcare sector or the education sector. And in terms of how prevalent they are, we've seen that a significant change from 2016 to 2021, where in 2021, we've had a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. So it's quite a significant change. And of course, these data are from 2021. So I'm looking forward to what the data will actually show for 2022. And we have actually specific regions becoming quite quite a target of ransomware attacks, such as the Asia Pacific region, or North America and Europe, and less Africa, for example. And within each of these regions, specific sectors are being especially targeted. And you can see here the in Asia Pacific, especially insurance and legal, in Africa, finance and banking, in Europe, utilities, but healthcare sector is quite a target as well, as I mentioned, especially after the pandemic. But especially when it comes to Africa, I'm actually working on a project at the moment looking at South Africa in particularly, and the cyber resilience around these types of attacks and ransomware. We've seen every day government departments being hit by ransomware attacks. So we've seen that in that country, government is a target. Now, what defines which sector will be the target for each region or which country is a different matter. It depends on their capacity, politics, attitudes towards the government. It could be so many things. However, we see that similar sectors remain the targets for each region. Now, why do many of the businesses, especially as I mentioned from the survey, identify ransomware attacks as a major threat? And especially it is because it's a different kind of risk. It's a risk that can immediately disrupt business operations, and a risk that in order to mitigate it, you need to put a lot of effort in it, involve different experts, and of course, invest in it. And in terms of preparedness, you need to involve the IT and really have a significant involvement, significant line of business. And of course, the risk implications of this type of attack can be quite significant, not just for the victim, but also, for example, for the entire supply chain of an organization. And of course, one of the main reasons why that specific attack is considered as a major threat is, of course, ransomware as a service. We have groups selling their tools and services for small amounts of money, and that actually makes it quite easy for anyone to use ransomware. So even less skilled criminals can actually initiate ransomware attacks using that service. I mentioned charities and SMEs, and actually we've seen that the motive behind these kinds of attacks is not only personal gain. So this is no longer necessarily the only motive behind these attacks. A personal challenge of breaking a system is a motive, but also a form of vandalism of specific organization systems or software is also, or networks is also a motive. But also we've been hearing for the weakest link in cybersecurity, and especially when it comes to ransomware, we see that criminals are focusing on the weakest link in the supply chain, and that is the contractor, the sole trader, the SME, because they don't have the necessary capacity to really prevent or respond to such an attack. And we've had work from ANISA and other organizations looking specifically on small and medium enterprises, exactly because of the challenges they faced due to lack of resources, lack of awareness and training of employees, inadequate protection of the critical and sensitive information. We see now a lot of focus around privacy of data and how SMEs need to pay attention to that as well. But also we see in small and medium enterprises lack of management support due to lack of time and resources most of the times, or lack of understanding around cybersecurity. So we see also lack of specialists. So SMEs do not own their own IT department, for example. But also one of the challenges we've identified is the fact that current tools, guidance, solutions for SMEs are either not applicable or suitable, or they're very complicated. So we've done research with SMEs and we continue to do so. And for example, asking an SME owner to actually have a VPN is quite a challenge because maybe they've never heard that terminology before. So it's starting really from the basic steps. These kind of challenges can change dramatically the threat landscape if we manage to actually overcome them. And one of the main aspects we will be seeing in the future is actually more and more triple extortion ransomware. So one organization hit, but also their business partners following being hit after that attack. And of course, business partners cannot actually have their business stopping or being disrupted. So then comes really the challenge of what do you do? Do you pay ransom or do you report such an attack? What happens? These are some of the challenges we've been looking at, and I will talk about that later as well. But also I would like to talk about the different tools and how easy or difficult it is for cyber criminals to actually initiate such attacks. So one of the main tools, which you might have heard, is Shodan, is a search engine open to everyone, and actually where you can identify any internet connected device. And actually, we've been looking at that with my colleague Ildiko Piet, and we actually wanted to see, okay, can criminals spot IoT devices by that search engine? And actually, the answer is yes, clearly yes. Actually, we've seen that Shodan simplifies IoT hacking. And as you can see here, we've done a bit of work analyzing underground forum data and discussions of members of these forums around tools for hacking IoTs, and Shodan was actually #1 of the tools. And the quote here says that Shodan and other tools like ExploitDB make hacking almost like a recipe that you can follow. So it's quite easy to actually hack an IoT device. And here you see a number of devices and specific targets that you can actually scan for using Shodan. And one of the main and prevalent specific targets are web cameras. This might not come as a surprise to many of you. It's the low-hanging fruit for many criminals, but also they're looking at specific devices such as heating systems, or even power plants, traffic lights, or even thermostats, if we talk about smart homes. So we see that it's a tool where hackers can actually identify specific models of webcams, for example, or even conduct a general scan of connected devices and then identify their target. However, Shodan is not just a search engine. You can use it to gain personally identifiable information, build botnets, or even gain remote control of a target device, or even initiate a DDoS attack. So we see that it's quite an open tool for criminals to use, and it's kind of handy because it provides them the kind of the basis to initiate their attack. As you can see here, we were actually looking at the potential security risks of IoT devices and whether that is in the past, whether now we have actually secure devices with no risks. And actually, we've identified that hackers are quite interested still in IoT devices because there lots of new exploits come out daily for different types of devices. And actually, from there, I want to move on to a specific type of device, and IoT devices, wearable devices. As you see, and as you know, we have more and more wearable devices coming in the market, with the most prevalent smartwatches, even smart shoes, smart shirts. Everything now is becoming smart rings. And these smart devices could be interconnected. But what we were actually interested in, because I think a large majority of youth are using Fitbits. These devices are promoted as a way to control your health, track your time of actually resting or time of exercising. It is actually advertised as a very good device to have. However, nothing is communicated around the potential risks, of course. So with Professor Basie von Solms, we looked at Fitbits and what really their use means for users. We now see Fitbits actually being used for making transactions and contactless payments. That means you connect your Fitbit to your account or your debit card. And that means that Fitbit Pay, which is a functionality, is working with also a number of Fitbit smartwatches. All these, of course, are supported by the Consumer's Bank fraud protection services. However, there's a limit at how much you could actually be supported by the fraud protection services. And it was quite interesting for us to actually look at the data that are being collected by fitness devices. As you can see here, from exercise tracking, heart rate tracking, sleep tracking, nutrition and weight, to even friends and actually data of others, especially if you're connected to others. And of course, there's a number of risks arising from fitness devices, such as lack of authentication and physical security control. These devices don't have still a security mechanism in place. And of course, these devices work with the Bluetooth, and we're all aware of the potential risks of Bluetooth connections. Location and tracking risks are quite significant depending on really your area of work, for example. One of the most kind of well-known examples of potential of location risks are from a secret military base where one of the employees there used a Fitbit, which was tracking their location as well. So that military base was not a secret military base anymore due to the Fitbit. And of course, third-party related attacks. So we've had examples of criminals using emails and passwords of third-party websites to log into Fitbits, and they use the details to actually claim for replacements, replacing their Fitbits. And of course, they gained also access of personal data of customers. And I touched upon the Bluetooth based risks. And of course, Fitbits are susceptible to various threats coming from Bluetooth, such as eavesdropping, message modification, a DDoS attack. So you can see how a very small device can actually lead to serious implications at an individual level or even a national level. Now, going to a little bit of around user behavior, and we know that users are not really thinking about security necessarily. And I've been looking at behavior change and training of users for a number of years, and we all know how challenging it can be to really accomplish that. So users are often not aware of security. They're not aware of the type of data that are being collected by smart devices or IoT devices. And of course, they don't expect they could be a victim. and that is another implication. So one of the ways we thought with Professor Bada von Solms that could actually solve some of the issues and promote awareness around the safe use of such devices is, of course, letting them know of the potential risks, educating them, and therefore providing them guidance to adjust settings, allow specific data to be collected, disable some other data to be collected, and functionalities, educate users on good practices, and of course, develop consumer-friendly privacy practices. But we shouldn't be forgetting manufacturers, and of course, all these devices, and we have now the discussion a lot of security by design, right? Or even privacy by design. And basically, we have to start thinking of how we could incorporate best practice policies and standards from really the development or even the design of these devices. Manufacturers can actually have and establish a functionality of the devices, informing users of potential risks to their personal information. And only once the user accepts the warning advice, they can log on to the device. And actually, what we suggested was something like that. And actually, Professor Bada von Solms was suggesting something like a guide similar to the guide that we take with medications. For example, with every medication, you have a warning of the potential side effects. Doing the same for IoT devices or smart devices could be helpful. So users could look at the warnings, the potential risks, and follow instructions of how to really avoid with simple steps the potential risks. This is one of the ways that we could promote awareness around the kind of safe use of devices. And I think we're at the stage where, of course, smart devices and IoTs will become a significant part of our everyday life. So kind of having that early on training and that becoming ingrained in our everyday life, the considerations around our personal information or the potential risks of the use of such devices can be quite significant in changing how we operate and actually how users being the weakest link in cybersecurity and cybercrime